allegiance. Vice President Erdenberger will lead us in the OPS vision and mission statement.
Both of which are on your agenda as well. The vision, every student, every day prepared for success, and the mission is to prepare all students for success in college, career, and life.
Roll call, Mr. Ray.
Cassidy.
Here.
Erdenberger.
Here.
Head.
Present.
Holman.
Present.
Juarez.
Here.
Cracky.
Here.
Smith.
Here.
Snow. Teeling.
Here.
8 present.
Is there a motion to excuse the absence of Mr. Snow? And I have not heard from him. Okay, moving on next to School Spotlight. Ms. Morrissey is here this evening. Good evening.
Good evening, President Holman, Vice President Erdenberger, members of the board, and Superintendent Logan. Tonight's OPS Proud Spotlight features the Omaha Public Schools art educators who earned statewide recognition this year. To begin, we're joined by Angie Fisher, our district's art education, teaching, and learning consultant.
Greetings. President Holman, Vice President Erdenberger, members of the board, and Superintendent Logan. It is my honor to introduce 3 amazing art educators and their awards from the Nebraska Art Teachers Association for their achievement, service, and outstanding contribution to arts education. Joe Bristol could not be here tonight, but he appreciates your recognition. He is the recipient of the NATA Outstanding Art Educator of the Year. This is his 8th year with the Omaha Public Schools. He is a proud 2004 Burke High graduate. He currently teaches at Wakanda and Edison Elementary Schools, and he serves on the NATA board as Member Services Director. Lindsay Hifley, NATA Elementary Art Educator of the Year, is in her 3rd year at Prairie Wind. She began her involvement with NATA as a student at UNK. She was a member of the NATA Fall Conference Planning Committees for their virtual and in-person conferences in Omaha, and she serves on the NATA board as ESU 19 rep. Ryan Dykey, NATA Middle Level Art Educator of the Year, is in her 19th year at Mars Middle School. Her students' works have been on display at the Olympic Swim Trials, State Capitol, Scholastic Art Exhibit, Jewish Community Center, and every year in 2 school-wide art extravaganza with the music program at Mars. Her principal describes her as an outstanding team player, focused leader, and an asset to enhancing a positive climate. All 3 share their creativity, artistic knowledge, and skills with our art department and have presented at NATA's fall conferences. They are true lifelong learners and regularly contribute to curriculum writing and lesson planning. Joe was a main contributor to remote lessons and videos. They have mentored new art teachers and have taken on the role of cooperating teacher as well. On a side note for the public, if you are looking for an art teaching position, please feel free to apply and join these fabulous art educators making a difference every day. All of us would like to thank you for recognizing these art educators for their awards. We appreciate your continued support for quality arts education in the Omaha Public Schools.
Hello, congratulations to you both. We are so very OPS proud of you and the work and the commitment that you've given to Omaha Public Schools and the students that we serve. Any words that you would like to share with us?
Oh, we have our music and art show Monday night at 7 o'clock at Mars, if you want to come.
Thank you for this opportunity. I love teaching my kiddos and being with OPS, so thank you.
Great, thank you. Colleagues, any questions, comments? Vice President Erdenberger?
At the risk of invoking some PTSD, I'd be very interested in knowing how you taught art remotely. What was your favorite activity, or how did you do it? Just one example from each of you. Because I know it's so important, but usually it's a hands-on thing. So what did you do?
So I I tried to stay within our curriculum, and so each grade level did a different project, but it was just a one-day lesson each time. And so then, going through directions, and then they would kind of work on their own while I could see them or not if their screen was off working, and then they would upload a picture to me via Seesaw or other things like that. Yeah, so things like that, or digital art where they would just take pictures of the artwork that they made, or a collage or something. Yeah.
I channeled Bob Ross, the true art teacher, to be on TV. No, I made 400 art bags for all of the Mars students that they picked up. And then they had like journals and paper and everything in their art bags. So when it was time for art, they pulled that out. We did bell work, and then I worked through the projects with them that I had made, kind of like an Elmo with the iPads we had, and worked underneath of it. And they just worked right along with me. And then they uploaded to Seesaw.
That's amazing. Thank you very much. Congratulations. Obviously well-deserved, both of you. Thank you.
Mrs. Cracky?
I can't get over all that you went through getting ready for your class. That was just terrific, in a bag, and it didn't then take any other time, so you could devote that whole time to it. I know that sometimes we weren't quite done when the art teacher would have to leave, and that's okay. We just finished it up, and it was such a fun time. It really was. I loved it when the art teacher came, and you didn't come as often as you should anymore, Is it still every 10 days?
Twice.
Okay, that's good. That's better than once every 10 days. Thank you for that. I'm sure they love it.
Great. Thank you both again, and congratulations. And Dr. Logan has a question for you.
First of all, good evening, and thank you for your work. I personally witnessed several art teachers doing what you did during the pandemic and getting the bags ready so that students could pick them up. So thank you for that. I just, because you're both artists, I'm just curious about what your own art work, as you are artists, practicing artists, is your preferred medium.
Mine's photography.
Cool.
I like graphite or colored pencil.
Oh, very cool.
Sometimes oil paint.
Okay, very cool. Thank you.
Okay, if you wouldn't mind just coming around, give us a fist bump, and collect your OPS Proud pin. Thank you again, and congratulations.
Yep.
Moving on now to board and superintendent comments. Dr. Logan.
Good evening, President Holman, Vice President Erdenberger, members of the Board of Education, those here in attendance, and those watching the stream from home. Beginning with tonight's agenda, staff will review recently released state test scores from the spring. The test, called the Nebraska Student-Centered Assessment System, NSCAS, is one snapshot of a student's academic performance. Our Executive Director of Research, Scott Schmidt-Bonney, will speak in greater detail, but we've known our students' academic needs and opportunities related to the pandemic for some time. You may recall we publicly presented academic data in January 2021 and then during a board workshop in later that year. We have worked year-round since then to support our young people. This summer, Next Level Learning served, this past summer, Next Level Learning served more than 10,000 students. Teaching continued through Thanksgiving recess in our migrant refugee program, and thank you to the staff who worked during that time this past week. At our last meeting, the board approved high-dosage tutoring for students. Student data drives our instruction each and every day. Before Thanksgiving recess, we enjoyed an outstanding evening with families and community business partners. At our last board meeting, I encouraged families to join the College and Career Academies and Pathways Exploration Night at McMillan Middle. Parent Candace Price spoke about her family's experience at Omaha Public Schools. Her daughter, Shalise, a North High graduate, even joined virtually from college. She's an engineering major in her junior year at North Carolina A&T, and she's doing really well. Thank you to Dr. Monica Green, the Price family, the Empowerment Network, and every partner who filled the gymnasium to visit with students and families. It was really, there were so many partners there, it really was completely full. And one thing that it demonstrated to us was our community's willingness and commitment to connect with our young people. This work is better connecting a student's time in high school to their goals for life after graduation. We have more open houses planned through January, and then on Thursday, our high school showcase on December 1st. Our high schools and programs will all be together in one place. Details are available on ops.org, and I believe that is at the Scott Center, if I have that correct, on the UNO's campus. A reminder, our community has 2 more opportunities to review science and social studies materials up for adoption. The sessions follow staff analysis and testing before bringing a recommendation to our Board of Education. Each session will have bilingual liaisons for families who speak Spanish, Karen, and Nepali. Date, times, and locations are posted under announcements. The final round of new school websites debuts on Thursday, 1st of December. Delivering on our strategic plan of action, new school and district websites are a significant upgrade for staff and families who visit us online. This was a multi-year effort across every district department and school. One can always find stories about innovative programs and student success by visiting ops.org/district news. Finally, congratulations are in order for the Central High Math Club upon winning UNL's Math Day Bowl tournament. Their last win was in 1995. Yeah, we should give Central a round of applause. That's awesome. Go Central. Central High senior Amelia Doña Munoz for winning an excellent distinction in review writing at the Journalism Education Association National Student Media Contest. She's also a gifted artist, if you know her, so she's really, really amazing. The 22, and bilingual. The 22 Omaha Public School students who earned their seal of biliteracy from the Nebraska International Language Association. We look forward to welcoming these recipients at a future OPS Proud Spotlight. Also in the evening, in the audience this evening, we have students from Marion High School. I always promise that I'm going to give them a shout out. Please make sure you do all of your homework, because my next announcement is about the snow and ice in the forecast. There is snow and ice in the forecast for tomorrow. Please stay tuned. We do have a 4 a.m. call scheduled with our team, although we are not anticipating that we will have to alter our schedule just in case. Because the weather forecast is varying at this time. The models are all over the place, as Jim Cantori would say, and we will be reviewing that at 4 a.m. tomorrow morning. So if there's an announcement that needs to be made, it would be made tomorrow morning, but we do not anticipate an announcement. So the 4-letter word that the bus drivers say I can't say, S-N-O-W, snow, and the 3-letter word ice is in the forecast. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Logan. I'm so behind, I haven't paid any attention to any weather. I just saw on the computer when I logged on weather advisory, and I was just asking the colleagues, what's going on with the weather? Jeez. Moving on now to, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, we also have a student in the audience from the University of Nebraska at Omaha. We want to make sure that we mention that student as well. Thank you for being with us this evening.
And along with that, there were 2 UNO students here last week that we did not know was here, and I told them that we'd make sure to recognize them as well. So we always appreciate our students coming to visit our board meetings. Okay, colleagues, Vice President Erdenberger.
Why would you assume that? Just 2 things. One is one of the items that we're voting on in the consent agenda, it happens to be item I-13, which in and of itself on the handout that you have is not particularly informative. It's the fact that we'll be voting on approving an educational and schematic design addition to Benson High School to include a new entrance and spaces for students to access basic health care, mental health services, and health care education opportunities. if you have occasion to go to the OBS website, to the board tab, to look at the agenda, attached to it are some drawings of what that addition is likely to look like. These sorts of things change, of course, over time, but it is, as described in the rationale, the new addition will provide a copious amount of natural light with lofty ceilings to exhilarate and inspire students and visitors. So I strongly recommend that you check out the agenda and the attachment to that item, because it is really beautiful and it fits quite well into the health emphasis of the academies and pathways at Benson High School. The only other thing I wanted to point out was that, in fact, as I lead the vision and the mission at every board meeting, I just wanted to reinforce that we refer to every student and all students. And I think that sometimes we lose track of who does and doesn't get the benefit of our welcoming and education and encouragement. And we are determined that every student and all students are on the receiving end of our benefits, such as they are. One of the things that I know that happens is when there is public comment, you may or may not know that we are actually not allowed to engage in conversation with public comment. You don't indicate any sort of acquiescence or validation necessarily. This is what's important, is the vision and the mission, which is every student and all students. And we hold that very close, and it drives all of our decision making. And those are my comments. Thank you.
Mrs. Cracky?
In the World Herald yesterday, we saw our math scores and everyone else's, and while they weren't like we would like them to be, I just want to encourage all students to get flashcards from school, and I know that they're available, and if the principal orders them, everyone can have a set, and I just hope that they have. And if test scores are not what you want them to be in your school, I certainly hope that every child gets the opportunity to take home flashcards, because that's the one way, the first way you get into the math, and you can raise that math score if you really just learn those facts and then apply them. If you don't know them, you can't apply them. So that's my point on that. And language, I would like sometime to have us talk more about our language and what is happening in that event, in that area, because those are the two things that you know when people talk to you, you know. And I always will ask them, or if they're figuring out math or it is language, and I'll say, and what school did you go to? And I'm so happy they don't say OPS. They may be from another school, but they need help too. You know, if they're not speaking correctly, Jane, is what I'm indicating here. Because they don't. Sometimes you go and the teenagers are giving you change or something, and they're speaking not like we'd like them to do. So I just want to encourage all of us. We all want that to be better for the city of Omaha.
Okay. With that, moving on now to public comment. Tonight we have one speaker on the agenda who has submitted a request to speak form. The board has adopted policy 8346, which provides public comment for a period of 1 hour. That same policy limits individual speakers to a maximum of 5 minutes. We ask that you respect that time limit. Mr. Ray will let you know when you have 1 minute remaining and when you have 30 seconds remaining. If you are in need of an interpreter, please let Mr. Ray know, and one will be provided for you. We understand that people have strong feelings about the issues they come and speak about, so please make sure that you refrain from outbursts or applause during public comment. If the subject of your public comment is related to a particular student or a staff member, we ask that you not identify the student or staff member, but instead provide that information to Mr. Ray, and he will assist us into looking to those types of specifics for you. If you do not get an opportunity to speak and would like to submit any written commentary, please provide it to Mr. Ray. He will make sure that each board member gets a copy. As a reminder, with last year's passage of LB 83 by the Nebraska legislature, the Board of Education is legally obligated to require any member of the public desiring to address the board to identify themselves, including an address and the name of any organization you may represent, unless the requirement is waived for security reasons. Tonight, we do not have any individuals requesting a security waiver. Remember that once you are called to the podium, to remember to state and spell your first and last name, provide your current address, and any organization that you may be representing tonight. Also, please remember to remain at the podium and do not approach the board table. If you do have materials to distribute, please let me know and Mr. Ray will come and get them from you. It is now 6:22 p.m. and our speaker for tonight is Michaela Kaiser. Hello, good evening.
Good evening. My name is Michaela Kaiser, Michaela Kazor, and my address is 11619 Grand Avenue, Omaha, Nebraska 68164. And tonight I am here today to speak about the perverse guidelines called gender identity guidelines. But before I state what these guidelines state, I would like the general public to know who I am so that they do not misinterpret what I am going to say. I'm an 18-year-old college student who grew up in the public school system until halfway through my freshman year of high school. While I attended high school, I experienced things that no 15-year-old child should ever have to experience. And although I did not grow up in OPS, I would like the public to know that my high school principal is now a principal at OPS. Here are only a few examples as to what I experienced during high school alone. In my history class, my teacher would constantly attack my religious beliefs with her unbiblical opinions. My class was seeded with un-American and anti-God ideologies instead of teaching the facts of history. When I took my complaint to the assistant principal, I was ganged up on and completely shut down. When walking out of my math class, I saw a drag queen that was allowed to walk around in clothing that exposed the chest and bra that the drag queen was wearing, while my brother was sent to the principal's office for wearing a muscle shirt. The library constantly had MSNBC on, which is a radical left-wing news network, but they would never have a right-wing news network on. Teachers would have pictures on their walls of gay people kissing, but I never recall a picture of a straight couple kissing. These are only a few things that I experienced in high school, and the result of this was me developing major anxiety and having to be pulled out of high school. They pulled me out to protect me from this evil ideology. The school system promotes and pushes this agenda, thinking that they're helping their students, but this ideology is doing nothing more but hurting and failing these kids. How do I know? Because that's what it did to me. This is what I experienced in the public school system, and although I'm not 100% sure these guidelines are that the guidelines OPS has was in my school district, I am absolutely disgusted with what you guys are pushing on these children. The guideline begins by stating the definition of sex, gender, gender identity, gender expression, gender expansion, transgender, transitioning, non-binary, and gender fluid. These guidelines state, these terms are ever-changing and evolving with society and the community they represent. The next part of these guidelines that is extremely alarming is under the section nouns/pronouns. The guidelines state, all employees should respect names and pronouns. Any employee or student who intentionally or persistently refuses to respect the gender identity of a student after notification of the preferred pronoun/name used by the student is in violation of the guideline. In this section, it is also stated, neither a court-ordered name or a gender change, nor a change in official student records is required. I believe that every person has the right to be respected, but under no circumstances should a student be pressured and threatened to be punished if they stand for biblical values that state that people are either a man or a woman. There's not 20 genders. Are these guidelines stating that those who stand for biblical rights are in violation of the guidelines and will be punished? If so, you are violating the First Amendment of the United States Constitution that states, Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. The guidelines continue with, in situations where students are segregated by gender, such as health, education classes, or a royalty, students will be included in the group that corresponds to the student's gender identity. Students shall have
minute.
access to the restroom that corresponds to the student's gender identity consistently asserted in the school environment. Under no circumstances may students be required to use gender-segregated facilities that are inconsistent with their gender identity. In no case shall a transgender student be required to use a locker room that conflicts with the student's gender identity. It is absolutely perverted and disgusting that you're willing to exploit young girls and boys in order to push this left-wing liberal agenda. I'm an 18-year-old female, and
30
I would be
seconds.
absolutely violated if boys were let into my bathroom. Doesn't all students' voices matter? If you ignore this fundamental question, you are showing that you only believe a certain group of students matter.
Okay, moving on now to the consent agenda. I will entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda that is before us.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, there's a motion on the floor by Mr. Smith, seconded by Mr. Head. Any abstentions?
Yes, President Holman, I have one. I need to abstain from item I-7, Claim C report for my role with the Omaha Schools Foundation. Thank you.
All right, great. To reiterate, we have a motion on the floor by Mr. Smith, seconded by Mr. Head, and Ms. Cassidy will be abstaining from Claim Report C, item I-7. Roll call, Mr. Ray?
Erdenberger.
Aye.
Head. Aye. Holman.
Aye.
Juarez.
Aye.
Cracky.
Aye.
Smith.
Aye.
Thielen.
Aye.
Cassidy.
Aye.
8 aye.
Motion carries. Moving on now to information items. Items J2A, summary of assessment results for 2021-2022 school year. Tonight we have Mr. Scott Schmidt-Bonney and team. Thank you all for being here with us tonight.
Good evening, President Dr. Holman, Vice President Erdenberger, members of our board, and Superintendent Logan. We appreciate the opportunity to be before you tonight. I am joined by our District Assessment Coordinator, Ms. Melissa Schroeder, to share with you the 2020-2021 results of MAP growth, NSCAS growth, and NSCAS ACT testing. We are also joined by our colleague from the Department of Curriculum and Instruction Support, Chief Christofferson, as well as our colleague from the Office of School Improvement, Ms. Suzanne Kramer, to highlight some of our efforts underway to improve student outcomes. As you know, assessments have been significantly disrupted by the pandemic, with no testing occurring in 2019-2020, and with NDE conducting a voluntary NSCAS growth pilot assessment in grades 3 through 8 in 2020-2021. Our district did heavily participate in that pilot, especially at the elementary grade levels, surpassing 95% of students tested. These realities have resulted in missing data, and data that is not comparable to prior years in many cases. The disruptions that the pandemic caused, despite the best and Herculean efforts of our staff, has certainly affected NSCAS results and mirror many of the results, or some of the results, we see in the MAP growth assessment. Throughout this time, our district has never stopped evolving how we serve our students and addressing their needs, even while we as a system were addressing the challenges the pandemic was creating. To this work, we have added addressing the unfinished learning created by the pandemic. Our presentations to you, our board, and the consent agenda that you graciously approve are all heavily focused on our efforts to improve student outcomes. The public release of this data, the 2020-2021 NSCAS assessment results, last Wednesday, November 23rd, and this presentation tonight mark milestones on the journey of this data, if you will. Prior to the public release, our research staff worked through many rounds of validation with NDE to ensure that the data shared tonight was accurate. The final round concluded last Monday with us getting final materials and results late last Monday afternoon prior to the public release on Wednesday. So tonight we'll share the high-level highlights of what we are seeing in isolation, as in this data rather. And next, we'll thoroughly analyze the data from these assessments, both in isolation as well as against each other and other assessments underway in the district, to glean further insights for our system to use in decision-making beyond the data that we share tonight. And so to get us into that data, I'll turn things over to Melissa.
Good evening. As Scott stated, tonight we're going to present the summary of our assessment results. As you know, the Nebraska Department of Education released the scores to the public, and you can see those on the Nebraska Education Profile website, and that was last Wednesday. Before we begin, though, we'd like to start with reminding you about the purpose of assessment in the Omaha Public Schools. We believe that in order to promote effective decision-making, the district's assessment program has to measure student achievement in order to meet rigorous curriculum standards and to communicate the information to parents and guardians. We also believe that another purpose is to provide information to staff to be able to improve instructional practices to meet the diverse student needs. And then finally, to evaluate and monitor the effectiveness of district curriculum and instructional practices. In the next several slides, we'll be reviewing our interim and summative assessments used by the Omaha Public Schools. And just as a reminder, for a refresher, formative assessments are those that are given during the learning. So formative assessment practices provide the day-by-day, week-by-week insight that teachers need to make adjustments in instruction based on where students are at a given point in time. Interim assessments, on the other hand, are provided at designated points in time, for example, fall, winter, and spring. They tend to provide data on objective measures of progress towards learning objectives and enable us to measure student academic growth and inform instruction. MAP growth is one of those interim assessments that we use in our district. And then finally, summative assessments are those assessments that are given at the end of a unit or a semester, or as in the case of state accountability, in the spring. And these are used to be able to demonstrate whether or not students have learned what was taught. Some examples of summative assessments are ELPA 21, the NSCAS assessment, ACT assessment. Those are some of the assessments that we use for accountability. And so we're going to start today by talking about MAP growth. And so for a little background information, the MAP growth assessment is our interim district assessment, and it's administered to all students K-10 for reading and math, and then we also administer science beginning at grades 3 through 10. Students take the MAP growth assessment 3 times per year, fall, winter, and spring. Now, the MAP test is unique in that it measures both achievement and growth. The MAP growth assessment uses an equal interval scale called the RIT scale. The RIT scale is used to show growth over time, and it's independent of grade level. This test is not a test of mastery, measuring all of your grade level standards. The test is adaptive, and what that means is that as the student answers questions, if they miss the question, the assessment will provide an easier test question. If they get that question correct, the test will provide a more challenging question. And the test continues this way until it finds the student's instructional level, which is where they're ready to learn. MAP growth, again, is not a mastery test. It's designed to provide information about the instructional readiness of a student. Another interesting thing and why we chose MAP growth as our interim assessment is because it uses national normative data. Normative data is representative of public schools and students across the nation, and it allows us to compare our students to peers across the nation. And we can compare them for achievement as well as their ability to grow across seasons. The norms provide a reference point for educators to review data and help gain an understanding of each student's current academic achievement level and the extent of their progress compared to their normative peers. The grade level normative data is provided, and It describes the typical achievement of a student at that same grade level during that same testing season across the nation. And we get these achievement norms as well as growth norms for fall, winter, and spring. The data and reports that we get from the MAP system are available at the individual student level, but also at the classroom level, the school level, and the district level. Having access to data at many levels provides opportunities for staff to work with the data throughout the school year. It also provides opportunities for comparative data. So an individual classroom teacher can compare herself to her grade level. She can compare to the school and also to the district level data. So now we'll take a look at some of our MAP growth results. One of the data points that we focus on when we look at MAP growth is the percent of students achieving at or above the 50th percentile. The 50th percentile represents where the typical student in that nationwide norm group is performing based on the grade level and the season, whether it was fall, winter, or spring. This is a metric that can be considered as just one measure of grade level performance. A general goal is to continually increase the percent of students performing at or above the 50th percentile. The data that you see on the screen is based on students K-10 who have a spring test score. And it shows that 36.56% of students are at or above the 50th percentile in reading, 33.57% in math, and 36.40% in science. Another important metric we focus on with MAP growth is the percent of students meeting or exceeding their growth goals. We know that all students can make academic gains during the school year, including those students who are below grade level, on grade level, and above grade level. MAP growth provides the data staff at all levels need to monitor and support student growth throughout the year. The MAP growth system actually provides individualized growth goals and growth projections for each student based on their own individual score. And they develop those growth goals based on the score the student ended up with, the season that it is, and the student's grade level. Growth projections provide growth expectations of similar peers in the norm group. Meeting the growth goal does not necessarily mean that the student is on grade level. Rather, it means that they grew as much as the students in their normative peer group. So for example, a student who scored at the 30th percentile will receive a growth goal based on other students at the 30th percentile. And so if that student meets their individualized growth goal, they will still be at the 30th percentile. So we try to push, especially for our struggling students, that they need to exceed their growth goals. If you are struggling, you need to beat your academic peers across the nation in order to make gains. The chart that you see on the screen represents the percent of students meeting or exceeding their growth goals from fall 2021 to spring 2022. This data is based on K-10 students who have both a fall and a spring score. So that top row of data shows the percent of students who are actually meeting or exceeding their individualized growth goals. Now, what you don't see in that top row is that in the next row, we still have students making positive growth. And so what you see in that next row is the percent of students, in addition to those students who are actually meeting or exceeding their growth goals, this other percentage of students are making positive growth, but they miss their growth goal, maybe by 1 point, maybe by 5 points, maybe by 10 points. And what happens is the students and the buildings dig into who are these students. Who are the students that are achieving their goal, exceeding their goal, not meeting their goals? And then they try to work with the students at the building level to determine what supports or needs need to be put in place to help accelerate academic growth. Now you can see, based on the district level data at the top of the screen, that a slightly higher percentage of students are meeting their growth goals in math compared to ELA. And so again, that second line that shows the students who are making positive growth throughout the year, they're represented there as well. And what that means to us is that these students are engaged and learning every day. But again, they didn't grow enough to meet their growth goal. And so again, goal setting activities and discussions with students is a really important factor in continuing to motivate and engage students to do their best on assessments. And that is what they do every day in the school buildings. We're going to now move on to the NSCAS assessment. And this, the NSCAS assessment is our state required assessment for grades 3 through 8. It includes the general summative as well as the alternate assessment. And the NSCAS assessment actually measures student performance against the grade level Nebraska College and Career Ready standards. And it's designed to show how learning compares to the expectations of what students should learn during that grade level based on their standards. The alternate exam is the one that's available for students who qualify as having significant cognitive disabilities. Students in our district, this is typically the students who are participating in the alternate curriculum program. The state requires all students to test. And so this additional assessment is designed in the same process that the state general summative is designed, but it uses the alternate assessment extended indicators so that it creates appropriate tasks for those students in ACP classrooms. This summative assessment is typically taken in the spring, with students end up scoring in one of 3 academic achievement levels. Developing is the lowest level, on track, and CCR/advanced. Several years ago, they changed the highest level to CCR, but they are starting this year, they're going to change that back to advanced to make it more user-friendly. If you score on track or CCR, you are considered proficient on the NSCAS assessment. The achievement level descriptors also exist for each of these designated achievement performance levels. And those achievement level descriptors describe in detail what students are supposed to know and be able to do if you are a developing student, on track, or CCR/advanced. The Nebraska Department of Education is transitioning to an NSCAS growth through year test, which will result in students taking NSCAS growth 3 times a year, fall, winter, and spring. This year, we are only taking the NSCAS growth assessment in the spring. Fall, winter, spring testing for NSCAS growth will begin next year. The chart on the screen shows the trend data for the percent of students meeting proficiency benchmarks by subject area. This means these are the percents of students by subject area who were either on track or CCR/advanced. The first year of data that you see for each content area reflects the baseline data for the first time the tests were aligned to the College and Career Ready standards. And at that time, new cut scores are developed. The 2021 school year served as, or I'm sorry, the 21-22 school year that we're reporting on served as a baseline for our new science assessment with our new cut scores. Now you're going to notice some holes in the data. You do not see data for the school year 2019-20, and that is because due to the national health emergency, COVID-19, the Nebraska Department of Education suspended summative statewide assessment during that year. Therefore, you do not see 2019-20 present on the slides. Now, you also don't see 2021, and that is because during that year, that was our first year back from the pandemic, NDE put out a special COVID report that year with the state assessment results. They did not publish those results side by side with 18-19 or this year 21-22. And that is because throughout their special report, they discuss what was different about that school year. Although our students were back, the opportunities to learn varied by district, by state, by individual household. And so NDE has recommended no direct comparisons. You won't see that on our public website, a direct comparison of the 2021 results. And so we don't show them side by side on this report as well. We did pull out some excerpts from the COVID special report, and they're in the appendix of the actual board report, but you'll also find the link, and if you're on the Nebraska Department of Education website, that link is still there to the COVID-19 special report, which provides additional information about how the tests change. Scott mentioned we participated in a shorter version of the NSCAS assessment called the NSCAS Phase 1 pilot. And we also did not have all of our students test during the 2021 school year. The data shows that we need to continue to address the unfinished learning and the disruptions from the pandemic. On the next slide, we can look at the data by grade level for last spring of 2022. And what you notice on this slide is that our elementary students were more successful at achieving proficiency than our middle school students in both ELA and math. When we look at our data by grade level and look at some trend data, this chart shows ELA trend data. And as you can see, again, elementary students seem to show a higher achievement than our middle school students. And again, you're going to see those holes for the 2019-20 and 2020-21 data. And you can see the trend there prior to the pandemic and then this first year after the pandemic. This is ELA. And the next slide shows our data for math. And you can see that same pattern of elementary having a higher proficiency rate than middle school. At high school, the assessment is NSCAS ACT. And ACT became our state test after the Nebraska State Statute 79-760 was updated by passage of LB 930 in the spring of 2016. And that's the year that state testing was required at grade 11, and that for accountability, we should be using the high school level had to complete and use a college entrance exam. And at that time, ACT was selected to be administered to all public school third-year cohort students, except those identified as needing the alternate assessment. And again, just like NSCAS growth at grades 3 through 8, an alternate assessment exists for those students in their third-year cohort. In general, this is usually our juniors, but there are situations where students have a specific grad year and they're part of that third-year cohort, but maybe their credits don't add up and they're not necessarily considered a junior, but they're required to test. The data we're presenting on tonight is completely separate from a Saturday ACT test. Saturday ACT testing is considered national testing, doesn't always include writing. The state ACT includes writing as an additional assessment. All of our students have to participate in the regular ACT test along with the writing. Nebraska's ACT has an additional layer added to regular ACT scores to include the NSCAS ACT performance levels. Again, you're going to see those 3 levels developing, on track, and with ACT, the highest level is called ACT benchmark. These 3 levels are defined throughout the presentation, but if you are a developing student, students in the developing level are likely to need developmental courses before being able to access credit-bearing first-year courses in the majority of Nebraska post-secondary institutions. If you score in the on-track category, on-track students are approaching the ACT College Readiness benchmark, and they are likely able to access credit-bearing first-year related content courses at some Nebraska post-secondary institutions without remediation. If you score in the ACT benchmark range, students that meet or exceed the ACT College Readiness benchmark are considered equipped to enroll without remediation and succeed in a credit-bearing first-year course at a 2-year or a 4-year institution, trade school, or technical school. Students have at least a 50% chance of getting a B or better and a 75% chance of getting a C or better in a first-year related content course. And these include English, algebra, STEM courses, science courses at a higher secondary institution. Students who are scoring in the on-track and ACT benchmark performance levels are considered to be proficient on the NSCAS ACT. When we go to the next slide, you'll actually see some of our scores. So on the screen, you can see the percent of students meeting the state proficiency benchmarks. This means on track or ACT benchmark. We have 22% in ELA, 16% in math, and 21% in science. The ELA score is made up of the English, reading, and the writing score combined. Trend data showing the average scale score is shown on the screen. Again, you're not going to see 2019-20 or 2021 for those reasons we've already stated due to when the state canceled testing. And then for 2021, it was due to the many factors related to opportunity to learn. As a reminder, the grade 11 students who took the ACT test in the spring of 2022 had both their 9th grade year and their 10th grade year disrupted due to the pandemic. And finally, for the summary, we know the impact of the pandemic is evident when looking at our assessment data. But we also know that the efforts of staff, students, and families in the Omaha Public Schools have resulted in MAP growth results showing that students are demonstrating growth in reading, math, and science. And our NSCAS and NSCAS ACT results are showing that our students are maintaining achievement performance on grade level standards. And one of the things we were able to do internally is be able to take a look at that 2020-21 data that is not shown side by side. And it's enabled us to be able to see that we are making growth from last year to this year. As a district, we'll continue to implement data-informed efforts to ensure that we're preparing all students for success in college, career, and life. I'd now like to turn the presentation over to Chief Christofferson and Mrs. Kramer.
Good evening. I would like to share with you, and many things, as Scott mentioned earlier, you all have been a part of, and we have shared presentations with you on the things that we are doing to move our educational experiences forward for our young people. And I can't say enough about the collaborative efforts that have been happening between research and our school improvement office and the accountability office to make sure that we are working collaboratively together in supporting coherent efforts and moving the work forward. And so just a few of those initiatives I'd just like to share with you. Of course, tutoring, which Suzanne just brought forward to you, I believe at our last time. We also, of course, next level learning. You all have been intricately involved in helping us move that work forward, as well as intercessions. 9th grade academies, we shared that data on why it was so important for us to get started on that 9th grade academy work, and we are definitely seeing the improvements of actually implementation of the 9th grade academies. Curriculum adoptions have been essential in this. As Melissa just shared in regards to the ACT, it is directly aligned, as is the MAP, directly aligned to our content standards. So when we are teaching the guaranteed and viable curriculum, and we're utilizing the curriculum materials that have been approved and developing curriculum guides, it helps to ensure that our students are having a very succinct, quality educational experience and exposure to the content standards. As you well know, we had math adoption last year as well as world languages. We're currently working on K-12 social studies and high school science, and we will be bringing forward to you the following year ELA for secondary, as well as considerations for reading interventions materials for secondary schools as well. Digital resources, you've had an opportunity to hear from Mickey Holbeck, who has shared about iRead, Amira, Lexia, and all of the work that's happening in early literacy. CLI, which is our Children's Literacy Initiative, and the quality of work that is happening in setting the stage right for our young people to begin that enthusiasm for reading at a very young age. And of course, the quality experiences that are happening with reading recovery that is happening in 3 of our current schools at this time. And we've also worked very hard to implement professional learning communities. As Melissa mentioned and Scott has mentioned as well, we have this data. What are we doing with this data? How are we translating this data into action into our classrooms? And part of that conversation is through professional learning communities, where our teachers are engaging even deeper into the learning that's happening within their classrooms and as class grade levels as a whole. And I also want to say thank you. We kind of, in looking at what was happening at middle level, we already knew a little bit, could get a feel that you already have approved a change in the strategic plan, which changed the goal for middle level of what we're focusing in on math and reading, of increasing 3% at each school. We had already changed that through the strategic plan last January. So thank you for approving that and helping us to move forward with what we need to focus on. So with that, I will turn it over for questions and say thank you.
Thank you, Chief Christopherson, Ms. Schroeder, and Mr. Schmidt-Bonney for the in-depth and meaningful conversation and information that you shared with us regarding student achievement data. I will turn it over to colleagues for any questions that you may have. Ms. Crackey?
On the first group of slides that you were presenting on the map, I didn't see what is the highest ranking that can be performed? We're looking at what I would consider middle. What would the top students' profile look like?
So a couple things. So there are 2 primary indicators we look at when we talk about MAP. The first is RIT score, and it's kind of like the marks on a yardstick. It's one common measurement. And so you'd want to see students, moving rapidly up that to the extent they were able to. And as students develop, academically, some students are able to score very highly very early on. The next key point that we look at, and one of the benefits, I think, of the MAP growth assessment, is that growth indicator. And that sets as a common expectations for all students that they grow. That's students below grade level, at, and above grade level. And so that is a common metric. We want to see all students meeting, or better yet, exceeding their growth goal, so that those students who are below grade level move to grade level, those kids who are on grade level move above grade level, and those kids who are already advanced move higher still.
I still don't know the answer. I'm looking at 70%, 80%, 95, 98.
Oh, I see what you're asking.
That's what I want to know.
Sure.
Because, I mean, do these go that high if students are performing at that level?
So we have students across all student groups who can top out our tests.
Sure.
And so certainly we have high-performing students across all student groups. What you're seeing here, I think,
Right.
is what you're referencing
Is the average.
the percent of students meeting or exceeding their growth goal is what you have here. The earlier one is against the 50th percentile. So what percent of our OPS students at their
Right.
grade level are performing similar or better to students just like them across the nation?
Well, I guess I'm still thinking, are we bumping up even past that? Do we have students? I mean, how many students? Do we have some students? I know we do, but how would I know that by looking where I'm looking, and even people who are tuned in tonight, they want to know we have students up there too, also. Can you tell me more about that?
So our NSCAS growth assessment is what we use to measure students' performance against a grade level standard. This is more about the performance of students against their similar peers. So we have students who are vastly outperforming their similar peers, and on average we have students who are performing admirably against their peers. And so they're kind of different in how we use them and their purpose. The NSCAS assessment is what I think it's more traditional to what you're referring to, and that's what percent of students at each grade level or as a whole are meeting grade level standards on the assessment.
Or above. And what
Correct.
is, like a third grader, what would be the highest level that they would attain?
The top of the test, the highest possible
99.
difficulty of questions, up to the
Yeah.
100 percentile.
Yeah, I just wanted to know that we have that ability
absolutely.
and that people know we are talking about that too, not just
Oh, certainly.
there. So,
Absolutely.
Not to pick on you, you're showing us a different kind of
Oh,
thing.
no, it's okay.
But it's just my extra questions.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Cassidy?
Thank you, President Dr. Holman. Wow, that was a lot of information. Thank you all for coming and presenting that very thoroughly. You know, we obviously we get all this information ahead of time, but until you really hear it, kind of comes together. It's hard to assess what it all means just looking at the slides ahead of time. So thank you for being so thorough. I guess when I look at this, the first thing I think is I can't help but think back to COVID. I mean, it's crazy because, I mean, I think back personally just how it was. I mean, I remember sitting in my office trying to teach my child and try to keep her on track and make sure my other ones were up and they were logged into Teams. I mean, just thinking back to that, it's kind of amazing that we are here and that we made it through. And then you look at these two gaps that these kids didn't take these tests for 2 solid years. And this data doesn't seem so bleak to me because if you have, I mean, you got to think back to what it was like. So I guess I try to hold on to that when you look at these numbers, and they might not be as great as we all want them, and they're, you know, maybe a little disheartening. But I can't imagine from a teacher's perspective trying to get students motivated to take these tests. I know my own kids have asked, why in the heck do we have to always take MAP tests? Like, they are asking me, and I think from a teacher's perspective, how hard that must be and how challenging. So to all those teachers out there, this is, hopefully they're not disheartened by this data. Hopefully the public understands that there is growth in there, as you mentioned, but we've got a long way to go. My questions, though, and this is just kind of for my own, something I've kind of always thought about with the MAP test. I know it's 3 times a year. So do teachers get to choose when they take those tests, or are those given, does each school get their own timeline of when they take them? I guess that's my first question. I've never really known that for the MAP test.
So
Because obviously those are our district tests.
So we have windows of time through which they can take the assessment within the testing window. We do maintain, with MAP we have flexibility. So some of the psychometrics, some of the statistics behind the scenes are impacted a little bit if the window's extended, but not so much that we don't extend them if schools espouse a need for that extra time.
Okay.
So we try to be very flexible with our schools in setting the window and making sure that meets their needs, as well as fitting in with other testing, so we're not asking them to do multiple things at once. And then within that window, we maintain constant contact throughout assessments to make sure that folks don't need more time and that everything's going as planned.
Okay, that kind of makes me think, while you were discussing the part on MAP testing, I couldn't help but think, so what if, like an example, what if I don't know what level they do geometry, I can't even think that, but let's say there's a teacher at the 5th grade level and they're working on geometry, and they know that the portion of the MAP test for math is going to have certain concepts that they have not yet gotten to, but maybe they're hitting those in the next couple days. That's kind of why I wondered, is there flexibility? Do teachers have any flexibility to alter the test based on where they're at in their own teaching? I'm sure there's not a teacher in our district that probably does not feel behind and that they're not where they need to be as far as where they're at in their curriculum. Is there any flexibility for teachers, particularly for the MAP test?
I think what's important to note is that with NSCAS, you know exactly what test questions are kind of on there, what concepts. With MAP, you don't. The MAP test is aligned to our standards in that the items that are in the whole bank are aligned to our state standards. However, we mentioned it's adaptive. So if I'm a 5th grade student, I may or may not get those grade level geometry questions because I'm not performing, or I may get something off grade level that I haven't had yet. But that is why we kind of monitor the growth, because with that adaptiveness, all kids it picks up right where they left off, where they were getting 50% of the items right and 50% of the items wrong, whether they're above grade level or below grade level. And that's the big difference between the NSCAS assessment in its current state and MAP growth, is that NSCAS only provides the grade level items, right? And so if a student is not on grade level or has mastered grade level standards, they're not getting anything necessarily, the data back from that test, as either not met or met. However, with MAP, we can kind of drill down and find out how far above or how far below they are. But it's not a fixed number of items or a fixed set of items that are delivered to the individual students. And so we do, related to that a little bit though, when the MAP data is broken out by concepts, for example, in math, the overall math score, and then you get data, geometry, algebra, those different areas. A teacher, when she looks at her classroom level data, has to think about, have I already instructed on this for grade level or not? But in terms of, we do have to keep within a certain window so the norms are correct, but they do have that flexibility, but not to change what portion of the test they take.
That makes perfect sense, and that autocorrectness makes sense as well. My last question, and just because you mentioned that the NSCAS is also going to be administered 3 times per year, I just think about all 3 times a year, 3 times a year. I mean, like I said, I hear it at home. We are constant. Will they intertwine? Will they have space? How will that work? What will that look like?
Sure. So we have some aspirational things here. We're working with the state for the 3-year testing model, and what that would do for grades 3 through 8 would be to replace the MAP assessment. So at the beginning of this journey, they partnered with NWEA, who creates the MAP growth assessment, to create the NSCAS growth assessment. So what they're currently working to achieve is to really provide a lot of that interim MAP-like data to our schools and to our system, to our teachers, et cetera, because that has value. We've created uses for it and purposes for that data. So making sure we have that, critical growth data and other key information we'd get from MAP, while also allowing the state to assess end-of-year grade level proficiency 3 times a year. So identifying the percent of 3 through 8 students, both at the beginning of the year, already mastering end-of-year standards, at the middle of the year, and then ultimately at the end of the year. So that's the aspirational goal, is to have it replace MAP for those grade levels without causing us to lose out on the good things we're getting from MAP. And so thereby reducing testing technically. If you get rid of the spring NSCAS and only have the 3 tests per year, you've dropped 1. So
Thank you for clarifying. That just sounded like, how are we going to do that? How are teachers going to do that? So thank you for clarifying.
Well, absolutely, and clarifications are always needed. Lots is always moving in the assessment world.
Like I said, until we actually come and hear the presentation, a lot of it. That's really my only questions at this point. I'm really proud of all of the district efforts, and we've been privy to all of the big efforts that are underway and are still coming, and lots more to come. But I personally am really proud of all that's being done, and thank you for all of the different departments that have collaboratively worked on all of the different recovery efforts that we have in place. I think that we're going to see good things coming in the next few years. I'm confident of that, so thank you.
I was just sitting here and thinking, remember when we just had the cat? How simple life was back then, and I think
California
benchmarking,
Achievement Test.
California Achievement Test.
Yep.
Okay. Mr. Smith.
Some of my questions have already been answered. I was wanted to know how well does the curriculum match or mesh with the NSCAS, and we'll start there.
It is
is actually very well aligned in what it is that we're doing and teaching, because you all help. We bring to you the content standards. We'll be bringing to you some content standards here in this spring that the state has already adopted. We bring them to you, and then we ensure that as we adopt the curriculum, that we make sure that the curriculum is aligned as well, and then the test helps to support that so that the students are actually getting tested on what they're being taught.
Okay. Now, the next thing is, for me, it's important that our kids are getting the comprehension component. And so I know we've gone from teaching to the test, which was kind of like a necessary evil. And are we seeing ourselves having to go back to that? Yeah, I'll stop right there. Then I have another question after that.
We do. We want to move away from that. As we all know, our North Star is our portrait of a graduate and what it is that the skills that they're trying to attain, and the content comes from getting the experience through the portrait of a graduate work. And so part of a piece that we're working on now is college and career literacy. So what is it that we need to be doing to ensure that the literacy skills that we're teaching help students to see the value in it as they move to a college and career ready for life after the Omaha Public Schools and that readiness. So we definitely aren't about teaching to the test, but we are making sure that we are teaching the content standards and students are getting a more in-depth experience with those content standards, so they are developing a deeper level of understanding.
Thank you. And then, so what does this type of assessment say about the teachers that we have in place? If the students, what does the assessment say about the teachers and the needs and the supports that they need if the students aren't progressing?
I think there's a lot of things to consider. I think everything that our teachers have gone through and all that they're giving each and every day is that they are, but I also know it's our responsibility to be in the classrooms helping, guiding, supporting, and providing the appropriate tools to help them be successful each day. And I know that we're working diligently to make that happen, and they're providing us some great feedback on what will be more beneficial to them so that they can meet the needs of the students for their own student experiences.
Thank you so much. That was put very eloquent.
I think one important component that I hear in your question, Mr. Smith, is that kids need more time in school. And so the team, besides Next Level Learning, the team also has opportunities for young people to go to school. Like we had many students last week. I got a detailed report of how many students would be in school last week, and thank you to those teachers who agreed to work last week, and paraprofessionals and bilingual liaisons that worked last week with those students. But also, we look very much forward to the on-demand tutoring that we will have available for we're going to be doing a lot of different things to encourage our families to utilize the tools that they will have at their disposal. So if you are a parent and want to have your child have extra reading support, there's a person and you can monitor your kid while they're having this additional support. And I'm pushing it now to you, especially because of your great community contacts and your opportunity to also share and proselytize it out in our community. But that's going to be a really important thing for our team to really get out there for our families. There will be that support in addition to in-person tutoring available for our young people. And we're encouraging, we need high dosage. So kids don't go one time and then that is the only opportunity. I believe high dosage is defined at 50 hours for tutoring, and we would encourage families to do more than that. So I want to make sure I reiterate or underscore what Susan, Ms. Christopherson has just shared, but they do need more time to practice. To Mrs. Crackey's point, practice is important, right? I'm not necessarily on the flashcard with you, but I do understand where that comes from, and there are all kinds of ways for our young people to practice with tools that they have at their disposal, whether they are online tools after school, summer tools when we have school breaks. For some of our students, those aren't all of our students aren't eligible for the break. Those are for students who have the most needs, especially language needs, our migrant and refugee students. But That's what we really need our families to take advantage of, all of that extra resources in terms of money, resources, and then, of course, time being dedicated by our professionals.
Well, thank you for that. I just wanted to make sure that that part got out as well. So the resources and the supports and the things are there, and it's on us as a community and families and parents to make sure that our kids are taking advantage of that. So we take advantage. We have to support our educators, and again, regardless of what comes out in the media, it's not. It doesn't even give a slight glimpse as to the hard work and the dedication that our teachers put in every single day, adopting curriculum and looking at the books and looking at the different ways our kids can learn, and it's just a lot that goes into it. And so, again, I don't want our educators to come under attack because these scores don't measure everything that goes in into 24 hours of being an educator.
Thank you
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
very much.
Mr. Thielen?
Thank you, Dr. Holman. So I'm looking at the slide with ELA and math and SCAS scores, and I think maybe the slide after it, which it seems to indicate that the early grades have always scored a little bit higher on the NSAS scores than the upper grades, but it looks like it's particularly acute in this most recent data. And I'm wondering, at first glance, maybe that's a little surprising, maybe a little counterintuitive, that the kids that had the most disruption right at the beginning of their academic careers with OPS did better than kind of our older students. And I'm wondering if there's an explanation that you've come up with for that, or a theory as to why that might be.
So from just a testing standpoint, I can tell you that as you advance in grade, the complexity of the tests kind of increase with the complexity of the subject matter. So if you think of third graders being tested, you'll have components of addition, subtraction, things of that nature, some more skill-based building blocks towards mathematics or greater understanding. By the time you get up into the middle school grades, you're being tested on all of those things combined and how you're able to grapple with algebra and things of that nature. It also requires that from a developmental standpoint, you're able to handle abstraction a lot more. And so both testing as well as developmental appropriateness and academic standards accelerate as you reach those higher grade levels. And so just from a psychometric testing standpoint, I can tell you that much. I'm not sure if there's anything from a curricular lens. I'm sure it gets much more complex as well in alignment with how those tests work as well. You're not just learning the foundational building blocks, you're putting them all together, and there's a lot more opportunity for challenge there, especially in a spiraling curriculum like mathematics.
So, and I think the larger question that I have, we've got, I think, maybe 2 or 3 strategic goals that are based on standardized testing at this point. We expected, I think in 2019, we started talking about, how we would measure these kinds of things through the pandemic and how we would move forward, knowing that we expected there to be a drop. We've seen the drop. We don't necessarily have all the data from those interior times. Do we look at this data? Is there anything in this data that can tell us how we have been progressing, or is this really setting a baseline that we move forward from?
At least with publicly available data. So as was mentioned, there was that COVID special report based on the pilot year that did show, especially in those grade levels, that we can have some confidence that it returned accurate results given the percent of students tested, still an asterisk by it. But we did show that we kind of flatlined, if you will, we hit our bottom that year of the pilot testing. And so it's maintained into this next year, the 21-22 school year of testing. And so we're starting essentially from this point. This reflects, what the pandemic has wrought and where we are building towards to regain where we have been before. And that's one thing I think it's important for the system to recognize, is that we do have a history of recovering. We've been through a lot of different testing realities in just the 10 years I've been here. What I've seen is staff, take a year to grapple with what this new assessment is, depth or the learning standards aligned to it, and then we start seeing that incremental improvement as folks get their traction and are able to not teach to the test, but teach to the depth that is required. It's very difficult to teach to modern tests. You have to have a significant breadth and depth of knowledge. It's not just the learning of factoids, as many of us experience, but how they interrelate within a subject. So they're much more sophisticated and challenging than what we're used to.
Okay, I'm just going to ask one more specifically. is this our baseline? I mean, are these our baseline numbers as we measure going forward, or is there a reason to think that we should be looking at next year, or is this our baseline?
I would say so. The one thing to look towards next year is the through-year model. And so that is somewhat of a transition.
Sure.
And I don't see, I think what you'll end up doing is comparing it to spring for some time, and spring only because we only have spring data from prior years typically. Yeah. But next year will be a bit different in that regard, seeing what it looks like when you're testing fall, winter, and spring on a criterion reference or measures such as this to see how you're performing against mastery standards. So hopefully it will provide, like I said earlier, a lot of what we got from MAP and found valuable and beneficial to our entire effort, as well as that additional information. So yes, I would say this really reflects our starting point as we journey back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thielen. Mr. Head.
Thank you, President Dr. Holman, and thank you for the information and the presentation. I really appreciate it. And just looking at the numbers, I understand why somebody seeing this without context would be concerned, and I have to keep reminding myself. And we've had this conversation, I think, as recently as last week when we were talking about the reading improvement numbers. That 36.56 on the MAP growth results for language arts and reading. That doesn't mean that only 36.5% of students saw growth and everybody else did worse. The actual growth in every group was the vast majority of students. They might not have been growing at the rate that we expected or that we wanted, but they were still seeing growth. So I guess I want to be forward-looking at this and seeing how we can build and how we can bring these students up to the growth numbers that we're expecting and that we want to see. I think sometime in the near future, right now we all understand that, the pandemic played a significant role in all grade levels in the decreases. But sometime in the near future, maybe that's 2 years, 3 years down the road, whenever it is, we're going to be expected to make up those losses and be well above where we were in 18-19. I think we'd all probably agree that 10 years from now, whoever's in this room shouldn't be saying, well, keep in mind these students' kindergarten and first grade year was impacted by a pandemic. God, I hope not. I don't think anybody wants to say that. So I know that the administration's done a great job putting together, tutoring, expanded next level learning, reading improvement, digital resources by the iPads, things of that nature. So is what we're doing to get these students back on track and to see the growth that we expect and want to see, is that enough, or are there additional resources that we as a board should be looking into or providing for you and our students?
Did you have a Brinks truck out front? I didn't see it.
Several trillion would help.
I think that we also have to realize that we have had to absorb a lot of new resources, and there's also kind of implementation fatigue as well. So I feel like we have absorbed about as much. I'm looking at the teacher in the second row, and she's giving me an amen, sister. And so I think we are at implementation fatigue. And I think that one of the things that we did this year, at the beginning of the year, to address some of the things that we heard from teachers, and especially that in concert with looking at where our kids were social emotionally, was we did some tweaking of the pacing guidelines so that folks were not feeling like they didn't have enough time to really reinforce those really great behavioral expectations as well, because it won't matter how much great instruction you have if there's chaos in the classroom. So we've kind of had to think about that kind of growth as well, because students being with many of the disruptions, we found that was something that really had to be, it's not a surprise to this board that we also had to reinforce that. But I do feel like right now we have all the materials that we could possibly absorb. We have high quality materials, but we also have to give our educators and our students time to use that. One of the benefits of the ESSER funds were that we are able to buy more instructional materials to replace those so that we can catch up on cycle. But that's also, that also too is a double-edged sword because teachers have got new reading materials in 2020 and now new reading math materials in 2022. Normally you would want to space those about 4 years, but you know, we have to think about, you know, when we have the money. It's a lot of, what is that, the book about when you have to make the best of a lot of difficult decisions. So I think we do have all the things that we need. We certainly could benefit from more human resources in terms of teaching professionals and paraprofessionals, as well as any of our vacant positions that we have in the classroom that support direct, I see you, Mr. Wakefield, any of our direct support children in the classroom. So that, I think human resources is where we could use the most benefit.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Vice President Erdenberger.
Thank you, President Dr. Holman, and thank you all very much. I will first acknowledge that I know I sent several questions about this presentation out relatively late last night, and you managed to incorporate the answers or reflect the answers, and I really, really appreciate that turnaround because they helped hopefully more than just me understand what we were covering. I did have a little flashback to the Iowa Basics, which is what I took when I was in elementary school, and all I really remember is they never had enough spaces for Erdenberger when you were filling in the little dots. Every year, not enough spaces. So I'm not traumatized.
It was the covered wagon part that was probably hard for you too. Sorry,
Yeah,
I couldn't resist.
it was the
and
fact that we
pardon
had
me that
to-
I, sorry, I pardon the board. I'm sorry. I apologize.
It's the fact that we had to answer on slates with coal from the fireplace and all that. But I do have a couple questions. Just to, first of all, make sure that I understand the MAP tests, because I haven't had students taking these of my own at all. So the MAP tests sound super useful. And do you basically keep getting questions to fail? I mean, you basically keep getting questions until you're not getting them right anymore, which I know sounds horrible, but it's the best way of knowing what you do and don't know. And otherwise, and there's sometimes it slips back. If you don't know this, they'll go to something simpler. I mean, that sounds amazing and a really good way to figure out what people know.
So yes and no. So initially, you'll get a question right, you get another harder question, so on and so forth. And the swings initially are a bit broader, so you may get a much easier question. And okay, you got that one right, so it goes halfway between the question you missed and the one you just got right. And by going through that process, through successive correct and incorrect answers, it slowly zeroes in on where you're able to have those final successes, rather. It's helpful to end on a high note. And so by adjusting widely at first and then closer and closer in difficulty, it can more accurately and more precisely pinpoint where you're at without having just fail until it's like, okay, fine, you're somewhere around. And so it's a very precise process.
It's kind of like the optometrist. Is this
Exactly.
clear or that clear? And it's like, I don't know.
They start off broad sweeps unless you have a record with them, and then they narrow it.
Going back to, I think it was slide 4, the one where we had the rows of proficients. Back further, one more, I think. Maybe it's the next one. Yep, I think it's that one, yeah. So this kind of goes to what I think Mr. Head was referring to, and that is those two numbers up there, really, we add them together. So we have, for example, 37% of our students meeting or exceeding, plus 32% showing progress.
Correct.
So in every case, we have anywhere from 60 to 80% of our students moving forward. Does the MAP test happen to capture, and not for public distribution or anything, but does it happen to capture how much below negative growth is taking place as well? So that of that 25% that doesn't show up on this chart, do we know that 5% is like, oh my gosh, they're so close to showing progress, but 15% are just not even on the, I mean, does that non-progress data reveal itself at all? Does that make sense as a question?
It does, and there's a lot in it. So
Okay,
you have
sorry.
students who are struggling, no, not necessarily in your question, but in all that could constitute an answer. So you have students who are struggling to really progress and to show that growth on the assessment. You also have students who maybe the first time they were gung-ho, ready to go, got down and did the test well. Second time, maybe it's right after lunch, and they're just not feeling it that day. So there are some of those components that can impact that. And I'm not sure if you have anything more to say on this.
I was just going to say that we do provide those numbers in the board report at the district level. At the building level, we provide a breakdown of that in their data books as well. And of course, at the building level, every teacher can see every single student's growth goal, and they get reports on what the projection was, what the observed growth was, how much they missed it by, and then they investigate. The teachers know the kids. They investigate. It might be an attendance problem with one student on why he missed his goal versus an engagement issue with another student. So the building dives into looking at what we know about the students that are making growth, what do we know about the students that are exceeding their growth, what do we know about the kids that are not meeting growth, and is there a difference between the students who are missing growth by 1 point versus those who are dropping more than that. And so it provides the data, and it's about the buildings dive into all of that, and they basically, they use multiple data points, not just academics, but they have to use SEL, attendance, all discipline. We talked about behavior. All of those things impact how well a student is going to do on a test.
I have a sort of a similar question with respect to because that's the growth question. On the tests of proficiency, when we say X number or X percent of our students are not proficient at this grade level, do we similarly get, okay, this kid is not at the 10th grade level like he or she is supposed to be? Do we find out they're at the 9th grade or the 8th grade or the whatever, so we actually know on a per student or on an average basis or something how far some of our kids are not even close to being proficient? Is that information that we puts into the mix somehow?
So with NSCAS products, so your NSCAS growth, at least as it currently exists with some hope for the future, as well as NSCAS ACT, you really don't get a sense for how far below or how much above necessarily. With MAP growth, we do get that sense. It does tell you more. Your student's RIT score would place them within the normative range of this grade level, so on and so forth. It also provides teachers a tool called the Learning Continuum, which identifies for their whole classroom, what are they ready to learn? And that includes things both on grade level as well as off grade level. So it gives you a better sense of in academic words aligned to standards, what are they ready to learn? So it does help provide some of that more precision in understanding where the student may have gotten stuck and where they're not able to move past, because the MAP assessment is able to go down off grade level as far as necessary to identify where a student is at and what they're ready to learn.
Okay, so I guess I was looking at the summative one, and that is you either are or you aren't, and we don't know any gradation within the aren't category. To follow up on what Tracy, Ms. Cassidy was saying, I too was thinking, oh my God, now we're going to have 7 tests. So I think what I heard you say is instead of 4 tests, 3 MAP and 1 SCAS, we will go down to 3 NSCAS. 2 questions. One is, so this really isn't going to be a very good baseline because we're changing the tests up again, although, there's some way to compare it, I suppose. Will the NSCAS growth tests continue to be summative, or does that growth reflect the fact that it's adaptive like the MAP test, and then the last one is summative, or is there a little bit of both? Or is it really just going to be a growth test and not a proficiency test anymore? Do you know? I think you sounded like you were still in negotiation, but where do you think that's going to come out?
There's still a lot in the unfolding, and what the various partners at play are able to get across the finish line as early as next year. So the aspirational goal is that it provides all the summative information we need to meet state statute, standards, et cetera, to have that criterion measure to say what % of our kids across these grade levels, 3 through 8 and 11, have met state proficiency standards aligned to state learning standards. And so I think that's the primary goal. Now the one from the districts as well as that the state would like to provide is to have it have a lot of the components of MAP as well. So primarily it's about criterion measurement, summative test scores. But with that added component, once you've established an understanding of where the student's performing in this test season, to give those off grade level items. Now, how far off grade level it goes, 1 grade, 2 grades, all the grades is somewhat yet to be determined, but it's very technical work with multiple players, so I know a lot of that's still in the unfolding.
Okay, well, that'll be, so we may still be evolving towards our baseline, and then we can.
I think you can reasonably assure that they will get the summative component, the NSCAS component, that which is referenced to state statute. It's good as you can expect, and so I'm hopeful that that's comparable at least from spring season to spring season. But again, a lot of it's still in the unfolding, and so as far as whether or not the map component of that is comparable, I think that's less likely. I think it's much more likely that the part of the test that is NSCAS will be comparable for the reasons stated. But the map piece is the more difficult piece, the adaptive piece. And when that occurs, you first establish where the student's at relative to grade level and then give them off grade level items. Well, that might influence their performance if they're frustrated with the grade level items, and now you're giving them easier ones, but they're done with the test. So there's a lot, both statistically, psychometrically, and from a human behavior standpoint to consider.
Well, and speaking of which, to also respond to a question that my colleague Mr. Thielen asked about the difference between younger grades and older grade performance, my experience is that the younger kids, sure, let's do this. This will be kind of fun. We'll see how we do. And the older kids, they don't get the grade for a couple months. Has nothing to do with whether they pass the class or graduate or anything. And there's a lot to be said for finishing the test as quickly as possible, because then you maximize your sleep time until the next test. And so I think when you think about how independent high school students are and you can't tell me what to do, I mean, there's a lot of things. There's, did you have breakfast? What's going on in your family? Have you been absent? But there's also that sort of, in my experience anyway, that developmental, you can't tell me what to do, and there's no reason for me to really work hard on this test. So it's, in a lot of ways, it's kind of just, I don't know, theoretical to start comparing scores, because it depends on what your population of students, how they feel about taking this test. But it gives us something, and on the theory that they all feel the same just about every year, we can at least within OPS compare. I don't know if that works statewide. Oh, which brings me to my last question. If we go to the NSCAS growth, right now, the MAP growth is against a national norm. Will the NSCAS still be national, or will we be only comparing against the 50th percentile at the state level, which I think is a big difference, in my opinion, anyway.
I think a lot is still yet to be determined. It isn't comparable necessarily to that broad normative group when the process is different. It isn't the MAP growth assessment. I think there would be a goal down the road, probably even longer than the adaptive component, to be able to have some of those broader comparisons, but again, it's yet to be seen what kind of makes it across that final first finish line and what the ultimate finish line is able to produce. But very likely it's going to be much more kind of focused on our state level performance than a more national normative group.
Noting, of course, that you already know that at a national level there are a lot more school districts that look like us.
There absolutely
and comparing our school district with the other school districts in the state is not a formula for good comparisons. I don't mean that we're doing well. I mean, it's just apples and oranges in some respects. Thank you so much for everything. This was really, really useful. And I did read all the attachments, as you know, and we'll talk about those some other time. Thank you very much.
Gold star, thank you.
Ms. Juarez?
I just have a really quick question, please, and only because I don't have any kids in school anymore. how do these test results get distributed? I mean, are they mailed to the home? Is it the teacher going over with the parents about the results? I'm curious how all of this stuff is explained.
Sure. So we prepare our schools and the staff within them to have the conversation with parents because, as you've heard tonight, it can be fairly heady, even just talking about MAP assessments. And so we create voice over PowerPoints and any number of training tools to deploy to our schools to prepare them to have these conversations, generally in fall conferences. And so our schools are provided the reports for each individual student that kind of shows where they're performing. Depending on the school, we have roughly 80 to 90% attendance generally at our conferences, and so that's where we focus, especially if that fall season is to provide that initial understanding of where their student is starting that year out.
Okay, so if a parent doesn't go to the conference, then what happens? What happens to the parents who don't show up at those?
So the record for the student's performance, the report that they would review, is still kept with a teacher. So if they then come to the next conference, perhaps, they would have that available to them. So we do provide the paper reports to the schools, to the teachers, sorted out so that they're able to provide them through the conference process.
Thank you.
Any further questions, colleagues? Great. Well, thank you all again so much for being here with us tonight and answering all the questions so thoroughly. Appreciate you all. Moving on now to item J2B, update to policies 5421, 5422, 5427, 5503, 5506, 5601, and 5700. Mr. Thielen.
Thank you, Dr. Holman. Okay, there's a lot here. A lot of these are clarifying and technical changes, suggestions from staff and others that are pretty self-explanatory. Let's see here. So 54, I'm just going to step through them one by one. 5421 is use of restraints and seclusion. And again, most of these are clarifying, help understand processes and exactly what the expectations are when restraint and seclusion is used. 5422 is service animals. And this was really kind of a rewrite of the entire policy based to kind of update it and make it consistent with the federal law on the use of service animals under the ADA. So it's the format, you'll notice the format has changed, and we kind of deleted all of the former policy and started fresh in consultation with our outside counsel to make sure we were up to date and with the best language consistent with law. 5427 is therapy animals, distinguished from service animals in that they're not legally protected or required, but occasionally someone might have a use for a therapy animal in the school that's not, doesn't meet the ADA standards. And this just puts together the requirements and that you will have to, a student or faculty would have to go through to have a therapy animal in our schools. 5503 is use of school buses, and this policy, we're just deleting it, and the reason for that is it's really just a recitation of our responsibilities under the law. So it's not really adding anything. It's a very short policy. It was only about 2 sentences. Just for concision and clarity, we're going to get rid of that policy. 5506 is safe pupil transportation plan. And I think there is some kind of heavy policy stuff getting done in here as far as changing some of the language that used to refer just to a weapon to any other hazardous item and how that might be handled. Making a few changes just to make clear what the processes are, again, surrounding behavior and things that happen on the bus. Those aren't big policy changes, but they are clarifications that help everyone understand what those processes are. 5601 is asthma and allergic reaction protocol. There's, again, mostly technical changes here. The one change that is significant from a policy perspective is giving students and parents clear guidance on what to do if they need a waiver so that their students aren't administered albuterol or injectable epinephrine under an emergency situation. And then 5700 is do not resuscitate, do not intubate requests. Hopefully we never have to use these, but really, again, clarifying the kind of technical protocols that we expect and we want our teachers and staff to rely on in the event that they had to had that situation arise. These are on first reading. I'm sorry, these are just information items, so there's no vote tonight. We'll vote on them in first reading in the next session, but I'm also happy to answer any questions now. All right, thank you, Dr. Holman.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Teeling, for the updates on the policies. All right, moving on now to receipt of reports. Item K1, we have one receipt of report for District Educational Benefits Eligibility Report 2022-2023. On now to closed session, Vice President Erdenberger.
I move that the Board of Education go into closed session for the protection of the public interest and for the prevention of needless injury to the reputation of individuals, to discuss with the superintendent, secretary to the board, and legal counsel pending litigation, negotiations, and legal advice.
There is a motion on the floor to go into closed session by Vice President Erdenberger. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Smith. Roll call, Mr. Ray.
Head.
Aye.
Holman.
Aye.
Juarez.
Aye.
Cracky.
Aye.
Smith.
Aye.
Thielen.
Aye.
Cassidy.
Aye.
Erdenberger.
Aye.
8 aye.
Motion carries. Let me remind the board that the purpose for closed session is for the protection of the public interest and for the prevention of needless injury to the reputation of individuals, to discuss with the superintendent, secretary to the board, and legal counsel pending litigation, negotiations, and legal advice. Let the record reflect that the board went into closed session at 7:48 p.m. Thank you for being here tonight. Let the record reflect that the Board of Education came out of closed session at 8:33 p.m. Meeting adjourned.